That's often like part of the grief, right? Is like realizing again each time someone, dear to us passes away, or we see, some kind of GoFundMe that is just like touches your heart, and someone's story that you don't even know. But each time that happens, it like reconnects us to those remembrances, right? Of like, right, I don't have forever, and like, am I living, my life to my fullest? How much am I loving the people dear to me? Like each time it just connects us to it. Like some people dying connects us to our life in new ways, which we miss out on when we don't talk about it.
Hello, and welcome to all of you beautiful souls tuning in today to the Heart of the Soul podcast, Earthing Nova on YouTube. My name is Amana, and I'm so happy that you're here. This is a space where we remember what it means to be wild women walking this earth. Together we practice using our voices, connecting through the ancient ritual of storytelling, sharing our stories of birth, life, and death, celebrating how both we and our stories shift and change across time. I hope that soaking in these stories will leave you feeling inspired, connected, and more alive in your own beautiful body and unique life. Today is January 8th, 2023. I am in our little tiny mobile home in southern Mississippi. It's currently raining outside with possible thunderstorms this afternoon. The full moon was just a few days ago, and I'm in my ovulatory phase and feeling social and light today. I'm super excited about my guest and the dialogue we'll have as we explore the overarching themes of death in our culture and the ways death has been brought out of the home and is rarely physiological or witnessed by loved ones. I have Hannah Grace here with me today. Our paths have crossed in a few different online communities. Kimberly Ann Johnson's Year of the Jaguar, and also through Emily Saldea's Free Birth Society. In both of these spaces, I really enjoyed your energy. I remember doing the mover mirror witness practice with you in Jaguar last year, and love looking through your beautiful website, the language that you use there, your offerings of somatic dance, and all the beautiful pre-recorded classes, one-on-one support, and so much more. I would love for you to share where you are in the world and introduce yourself in whatever way feels good to you right now.
Thank you so much. I'm Hannah Grace. I am in Western North Carolina in Appalachia. It is a rainy day today as well. We had some big storms a couple nights ago. Yeah, it's beautiful out. It's not too cold. Um, yeah. And introduce myself as well. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in whatever way you like to or feel called to right now. Yeah.
Okay. I'm so excited to be here, and I loved your introduction. Thank you. I, gosh, um, I'm a mother of one uh, son, a free birth. That was incredible. I'd actually found death and death work before I was ever interested in birth and birth work. And yeah, I do various things. You kind of spoke to them, so I won't go too much into that. But I really just am one of those women who are just fascinated with this life, being in a human body, and all that that entails, from, grief to rage to bliss and movement and just being in skin and what that's like. And then, of course, bringing life into the world, and also fascinated by death in, yeah, in different ways. So I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, as you were speaking, you made me think about just as like females, as women, that we, hold that full like birth, life, death cycle within us. And I remember in my maidenhood having that like recognition and awareness that each month I like birthed from my ovaries this little tiny ovum, and that if it wasn't fertilized, that then it died, that life potential would die and then be shed through my blood a few weeks later.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so interesting that you found like had this curiosity about death and death work before birth. I wonder if you could speak to sort of your what drew you there, or did you have like an initiatory experience of death? And
Yeah. Um, I think for me, I mean, I have a Scorpio North Node. So I think part of my life, just since I was a kid, I was really drawn to kind of the darker, drearier things. Like I loved, I remember in middle school, like I would read the most like gnarly, books about like biographies about drug addicts and just like, the deep painful parts of life was just so fascinating to me. I also grew up in somewhat of a traumatic environment, so I was just comfortable there, I think, and was naturally drawn towards some of those more taboo subjects. Um, in a way, it really just like piqued my curiosity, and I like to like watch those kinds of things and immerse myself in those kinds of things. So that was definitely part of it. And I don't want to get like too much into this particular story, but when I was 20, I embarked on a journey with 5-MeO DMT, which is like a really, really potent psychedelic. And the person who provided it to me gave me way too much. And for my also tendency to be kind of like have a leaving pattern of my body where I go more to like leaving, where it's like safer there. So the combination of the two created a really like felt like near death experience where I felt it took very many months for me to feel in my body again and to feel a part of this world again. And it led me to just have a, a greater awareness of that space between life and death and choosing to be here and what purpose is and just the fragility of our human path. So those on top of each other, and then um and then did I attend did her death happen before that training? Yes, it did. And then my stepmom became very ill, and so it just like happened, and I was just in this place, this very like raw and open and tender place, and supported her for the final weeks of her life and was a part of her passing, and it just felt like where I was supposed to be. It just felt like this is what this is where I'm meant to be. And she passed in the hospital, and we'll talk more about her passing, I'm sure. But she passed in the hospital, and right after she, died, a couple hours went by, and I wanted to go sit with everyone else on that floor that was in their final hours. Like I didn't want to leave. I just wanted to like continue to visit each person there and walk with them as they moved between worlds. So that was kind of my introduction, and I ended up doing, some courses and some studying, but yeah, that's how I got there.
um, yeah, it's so interesting the paths that we take and journey through. It's funny that you mentioned having a Scorpio North Node. Is that what you said? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Scorpio sun sign, and but I was super drawn into like birth and babies in my younger years. And then for me, it was an initiatory experience when I was 25 and my first love died, and
Mm.
I was present with him. He had cancer, so we knew it was coming, but yeah, in my 20s, when most of my peers, I still felt very invincible or hadn't really faced that other side of life and birth. And, now I so recognize how inextricably linked that they are and that we can't have one without the other. But being present with him and witnessing his last breaths and his body, animate and embodied, and then with the absence of his soul, and then having experiences and interactions with his soul from this other realm. And that was a whole other, big awareness and opening for me.
Mhm. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the dreams afterwards are so that like all of my loved ones who have passed, which yeah, I didn't have too much of in my youth, like in my childhood. And like I don't think any family members passed away when I was a child, but as an adult, in the last 7 years, there's been significant deaths in my life, and yeah, getting to like meet them in dreams and hear from them in dreams, which sounds like you did as well with your love, and just like yeah, this threshold of this like life death portal um is so fascinating. And the same thing I felt when my stepmom, her name was Kathy, when Kathy passed away, was I felt the same presence when I gave birth to my son. um yeah, the same like guardianship. There's like this like guardian gatekeeper
Hmm.
energy that was like there, like they are passing these souls through. I don't, yeah, there's not really more to say than just like what I felt, I don't really have like a strong belief around what happens in that place and what it's like to go between the two and
Mhm.
all of that, but just like the energy. That's the best I can really describe it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I've said the same thing about like the birth and death energy, that it feels so palpable when you're in it, and it's almost hard. I don't know that we necessarily have the language yet, or if maybe I just don't have the language to really describe what that's like. And also, I think, sometimes people want, especially women who've never like been present for birth or birth themselves, like they want to know, well, what's it like, and I can like describe just, until I have no words, but it's not the same as experiencing it. And I
Yeah.
feel the same is true for death. And, although I've been present, I don't know what it's like or what it will be like to go through that process myself and
Mhm.
pass through that portal. And I too don't exactly know what's on the other side or what that experience is like, but I can say that the energy of that space, I'm at peace with that, and knowing that is where I'm headed. We come to go, and nobody gets out of this life alive. We all die. And I've actually, I don't know, found comfort in that or beauty in that as well. And
Yeah.
imagining my body returning to the earth, like thinking of myself as this, as part of the earth I made from her minerals and water, and here I am standing above the earth now and moving and have this soul inside of me. And at some point, this soul will exit my body and my flesh and blood will return back into the dirt and the earth.
It's so wild. Being human, it's like so wild to I'm always just like I'm always just feel so amazed, like by pregnancy, like carrying a life inside of your womb and it growing like it's and then giving birth to it and it like being a part of you is just it's just mind blowing to me. Like it will never not be mind blowing. It will never not be like, whoa, this is wild. Um, and the same thing about just like being alive. It's like, whoa, okay, we're like in these bodies that can like move and see and talk, and we understand words that we've like made up that are just sounds that we can like communicate and it makes sense. And then, life and everything that happens in that, and then we die. Like, okay, wow, wow, trippy. Hey,
Yes, yes, always. I mean, yeah, like you said, birth is always incredible to me, and death is the same. It never, I
yeah.
don't know.
And I think
Yeah.
part of like for me um in my 20s, kind of during that time with that really traumatic experience, um, I think I think part of why I was in such a hard place is because our common world, like our common society, doesn't talk about how wild and strange and incredible it is to be alive and like how mysterious it is. And death, like that those aren't common narratives. So I felt so alone that I was in such like almost overwhelmed at the purpose of being a human and like why we're here and what we're doing and what it's all about, because it's just, our mainstream culture is just so like we're just here and this is just what we do and that's that, and figure it out and, you know, button up your whatever and get to work. I felt so alone in the wonder, and in the not knowing. And I didn't understand how people like live their lives not knowing, or like, yeah, like why isn't everybody asking these questions? Um, and I just think it's so, yeah, it's so important. I think a lot of time I hear moms, or I'll see it in Facebook groups or whatever, like not knowing how to talk to their children about death when like a
Hmm.
loved one is dying or an animal is dying, or they even don't talk about it. They don't tell them that they're eating meat, like that things are um, hidden, uh, which I think is just such a disservice um, to humans, to small humans, that what I have seen, the children who are immersed in, not immersed in, but are aware of death, are so reverent of it just naturally. They're so intrigued and reverent and curious. At least my son is, and a couple of the other kids I know who process animals and things like that, and it's just like part of
Hmm.
their life. Um, yeah, it's beautiful to witness in my son for sure.
Yeah, my children are the same. Like you speak, I don't, hide death from them. My first full-term baby died shortly after she was born, and so, like I've talked about her for his whole life, and he knows that she existed, and yeah, we talk about death and that I'm going to die someday, and that's, just part of life. And yeah, the meat that we eat, we speak about the animals, and I use the word death and dying too. I find, a lot of people, adults, even speaking to other adults, have a really hard time saying that a person died, like using the
I
word past, or,
mhm,
there's other language that people use, but actually the word death and dying are like almost, yeah, hard for people to even say the word, let alone like have like reverence for it or ponder it or like really spend time with the knowing or wonder
mhm,
about the experience of it.
mhm.
And like you spoke to before about like your experience with um DMT and how that like shaped you and changed your experience with life, like that too with Bjorn's dying and being present with him, and then like having, I definitely had a new reverence and awareness about death and also about the preciousness of life and
Yeah.
wanting to like live in a more, I don't know, embodied, joyful, just like experiential way that I was not taking for granted that I was currently living, knowing that I would not always be it, that my time, I don't know when my time will be.
Right. And that's often like part of the grief, right? Is like realizing again each time someone, dear to us passes away, or we see, some kind of GoFundMe that is just like touches your heart, and someone's story that you don't even know. But each time that happens, it like reconnects us to those remembrances, right? Of like, right, I don't have forever. And like, am I living, my life to my fullest? How much am I loving the people dear to me? Like each time it just connects us to it. Like some people dying connects us to our life in
Mhm.
new ways, which we miss out on when we don't talk about it. Um,
Yeah, and
yeah,
culture isn't, our culture is just not comfortable talking about it. We, the grief, like you said, a lot of people have a hard time supporting other people in grief because they're just like afraid or don't know what to say or do or don't want to think about it or face it themselves.
Mhm.
Um and yet grief is like such an important part of our experiences as human. I feel like we all, have suffering in different ways and forms, and
Yeah,
um, learning to move with and with grief through its ebbs and flows. And for me, finding ways to like honor and create ceremony and ritual around death or these grief experiences has been really important for me and my, healing that is open-ended and endless and continues on always. Um, and sometimes the women that I work with, I feel um like I didn't grow up with a lot of ceremony or ritual, or I thought it was like something that only like formal religions did, or it's like it was in this like other category.
yeah,
And it's just been in, maybe the last couple of decades that I've opened up to the awareness and remembering of my own self that I can create it myself and it doesn't have to look a certain way or be a certain way, that it's, I'm creating it for me and for that other person. And that, yeah, that it doesn't have, it can be so simple as like a candle or having a piece of pizza and knowing that he loved pizza and thinking about him as I'm like consciously eating this piece of pizza.
mhm,
Um, I
mhm.
wonder maybe, and I also, I'll speak to all, I'm curious about you and your somatic movement practice because I also love using movement in like grief and ways of sometimes expressing grief without words through movement.
Yeah,
Because I found that to be really beautiful and healing and just
yeah.
impactful for myself and some other women. And so yeah, what has your journey and experience have been with grief in your life?
Mm, grief. I was, like many women, um, uncomfortable with rage. So I had a lot of grief. Like, people say like when you're angry, it's that you're really sad, right? For me, it was like when I'm sad, there's actually like a lot of anger, right? Underneath it. And I always felt like I had this like well of grief that if any just like if I just started to talk about something that was like sad, it was just like that well was just like so, 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 so deep, right? And to me, it's like there's always grief. Like grief is always, always, always present in the world. And if we want to grieve, we can. There's always, always, always something to grieve in this like tragic world that we live in. Um, I don't feel that well of grief anymore, like through somatic practices. It doesn't feel like something that like overpowers my being, like the trauma vortex kind of thing. And now just feels like a very integrated part of my life. Like I'm very comfortable. Not even comfortable in grief. It's not comfortable, but it's like I'm okay with it. Like I'm okay with being there and in it. And with somatic experiencing and then the somatic movement practices that I do, getting really comfortable in this like expansion and contraction and this like pendulation, right? Like going into grief, or let me back up a second. The pendulation, like swinging, right, between two places, a more like unpleasant place and a more pleasant place, has been a really powerful practice that I've got to see in action with grief within the last, few months. Well, I guess summertime, so the last 6 months or so. But also Zenith Virago, who I learned um, some death work from and some celebrancy stuff from, like holding funerals. She talked about grief as a swing rather than a wave, like a lot of people talk about it.
Mm.
She talked about it as a swing, which has always stuck with me. Um, like despair on one end and like bliss on the other, really, because it's like every death is different. If we're talking about grief in direct relation to death, every death is going to be different for every like person. So who the person is to us and how they died and like, what that means to us is what creates how we grieve about them. So even if we have the same, my sister and I have the same mom, when she dies, like our grief will be different.
Mhm.
There's sometimes there is bliss in people passing away, right? And sometimes there's rage and disgust and, all kinds of emotions to be felt. So, anyways, the swing I have found in the last year to be so powerful. Um, my great aunt passed away over the summer, and she was very, 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 very dear to me. And I lived with her when I was a teen, and she was just wonderful. And I see like so much of myself in her. And my son and I went out to see her before she died. She like got sick very quickly, um, and it was a very fast death, very fast decline. So my son and I were flying out to go and see her. And when we arrived at the airport, my sister let me know that she had actually died while we were on our way there. My son is 4. He was 3 at the time. But he'd already been like around. He'd been to several funerals of family members and quite familiar with death. And I had full trust in him. And I said, let's go see her. Like, let's go see her body. Um, so I called and I said, please don't let them take her until we can get there. She lives in LA, so it took a while to get to her because of LA. So yeah, they held her body. She died at home. So long enough for us to get there and see her. And my son got to see her and still talks about it all the time. And then I was with my sister. My sister lives there. So it was like so much grief. It was the first death I'd experienced where I felt like regret, and I felt yeah, guilt and regret that I hadn't experienced another death. Like I didn't get to say to her or be with her in the way that I really imagined it happening. Like I planned on staying the night with her all night while my son was sleeping and just being with her. And I didn't talk to her on the phone because I thought I was, going to see her. So there was a lot happening. But then I was with my, wonderful sister and my beautiful little 2-year-old niece. And I stayed still for like I think we stayed for 4 days. So we were just in this beautiful swing between grieving, and her and I would just like cry and talk about, everything that we miss about her and what we wish we could have done and all of that. And then we would like rally our kids up and go to the beach and like laugh and play at the beach and really letting ourselves be in our humanness and like all of it and getting to be in the whole spectrum. Whereas earlier in my life, I thought that if I was sad, I had to like stay sad.
Mm.
If something bad had happened, it's like that's all I can do, or that's maybe all I had the capacity for, right? To like be in one. So it's just so beautiful to just carry through life and know that we are in reverence. We called her Jima, like in reverence to Jima, our Aunt Sue, um, in everything that we're doing, in every emotion. We don't have to be sad and crying to be like celebrating her life and to be grieving her. Um, yeah, which was just so beautiful. And my son's so sweet. Now, anytime I'm crying, he's like, "Are you sad about Gma?" And it's
Oh.
like, no, not well, I am, but like not that's not why I'm crying. Um, yeah. And
Mm.
you were talking about, saying death and dying with your kids, and he was so fascinated with where she went. He was like, "Where did she go?" Because this is the first like dead body that he had seen. Where did she go? So we were talking a lot about that. And he's always been very like fascinated with like why are we here and how did we get here? So God has like become part of our family conversation because it's something that he's very intrigued by. So I think I said like, her spirit left. He's like, well, where did it go? And I said, well, it went to like go be a part of everything, like be part of God. So now he refers to death as going to be with God. And he'll be like,
Mm.
Mom, I don't want you to go to God or whatever. It's so sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so grief. That is, yeah, that's part of it. I think it can be so all consuming, and it can also be like something that just deepens us into our
Mm.
into our bones and into the world and into our families and everything. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. And like you said, I love the swing, you in the swing. And um I feel like, yeah, it's so important to be able to be in like the depths and have express those emotions when they're present. And then also for myself, and I know many people speak to this too, about how having that really like dark experience also in some ways makes like the joy like even brighter and the love like more magical and vibrant. And that was true for my own experience that yes, I was like in these the biggest depths and the when my child died, I had these most primal screams and cries that I never knew were within
Mm.
me. And yet also that experience with her has changed me as a mother with my living children. And I still
Mm.
mother her, in the soul realm. I mother her from afar in this other cosmic way, and I always
What
will.
what's her name?
Hartley.
Hartley.
Yeah. And then, and yet my relationship with my kids and the way that I commune with them feels changed by her life as well, her life and death.
Hmm. Yeah. How could it
Mhm.
not?
Yeah.
Right?
No, I couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Hartley. How old would she be now?
7.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. And I have, yeah, 2 living children now that are one that just turned 6, and then a little girl that's almost, so my boy, it just turned 6, and then a little girl that will be 3 at the end of March.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah.
Hmm. And I wonder if maybe we can, I was looking into a little bit about like, so I worked in palliative care in a hospital setting for a number of years and like did a lot of end of life care and advanced directives where people are talking about like where they want to die. And, there are studies that say that like 80%, 70 to 80% of people say that they want to die in their home. And
Mhm.
yet, seven out of like 70% of them actually die in hospitals and nursing homes and long-term care facilities.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's just so interesting to me that this can be like the desire of most people to be at home, and yet that's not where we end up. And
Yeah.
the way, I know you and I are in the birth world and we talk a lot about birth and the medicalization of birth and how it's physiological birth is really rare in this moment in time. And the same is true about death, and that death is like highly medicalized, sometimes
Highly
even, like with like
induced.
dying with dignity. Yeah, it's induced by medicine in like subtle ways and also in very
Yeah.
like overt ways that literally medical providers kill human beings with pharmaceuticals
Yeah.
and it's legal.
Yeah. It's so wild, hey? And that's
Mm-hmm.
like how most people die if they're like sick and dying.
Mm-hmm.
It's like from what I've witnessed,
Mm-hmm.
um, very much like an induced death, like an assisted, hurried death, and like kind of
Medicated.
like sugar coated in a way. But it's like we're keeping them comfortable. Um, yeah, yeah. There's so much there, and I think what you spoke to of like just how many people want to die at home but don't speaks a lot to our culture, a lot to our um, family systems, family units, and it's like easier to pass the responsibility of our parents or whoever off to the hospital or a nursing home than to keep them in home. Um, and that's, such like a complicated subject itself because, there's all this like trauma within families and you might not want to
Yes.
take care of your
Yes.
parents. And, it's like, yeah, it's just so much. It's all connected and some people don't want to be a burden to their children. Some parents don't want to be a burden to their children. So they're just like, oh, just put me in a nursing home, whatever it may be.
Mm.
Um, yeah, but that's just like such a
I know.
huge conversation and could be very, very, very like triggering for lack of a better term. Very,
Mm.
um, yeah, even for me.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I wonder sometimes about what the world, what our culture would be like if both births and deaths happened on more like innate
Mm.
natural timing, because right now they're both hurried.
We would live in a different world.
Yeah.
It would be amazing. It was like, yeah. I mean, after I gave birth to my son, the next day I was just like, and I know so many women have felt this who've had like physiological, like true physiological, undisturbed births, have all had this feeling of like, wow, if every woman gave birth to her child this way,
Mm.
we would change the world. Like this place would be so different if women just knew like the power of their bodies and trusted their bodies and really got to meet birth. Like I think of birth as almost like a goddess, like got to really like meet birth face on. Wow, and their partners and whoever else got to like witness that. This place would be so different.
Mm.
And yeah, death the same, just yeah.
Yeah, it's like where are we? Where are we going as a culture when we've nearly lost wild, like mammalian physiological birth and death,
Yeah.
which are just, and like you speak to birth, and I feel like if women had those birth experiences too, they might also, walk towards death in a different way as well.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, because for so many of us, I mean, from the moment we are born, like I was born like planned cesarean, you know. My mom was pretty like hippie, new agey LA though, so I got like, immediate skin to skin and breastfeeding and know anything and all of that. But still, it's like I was still like very much born indoctrined into the
Mhm.
system, like so many of us are, and go to our regular like pediatric visits, and it's just like a part of our for most people's, it's a part of their just what they think this life is, what we were talking about earlier,
Mhm.
like what they just think it is. And when you have something up with you, you just like go to get, you go to urgent care or you go whatever to the doctor and you get the thing. And when you're dying, of course, you do the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, with the beginnings and the ends, most of them are taken within a hospital setting, those first breaths and last breaths, and we have a number bracelet on our wrists, like moments after we're born, or on your ankle, normally on
Monitored.
babies.
Yeah, and hooked up to monitors and
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Especially like like monitoring a heart when someone's dying who said they don't want to be brought back, like, with the shock to the heart or whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why are they hooked up to a monitor still? Why is that on there? Won't we just know when they die? Like, we don't need to look at that to for us to know that they're flatlined. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's so it's so wild. And then it's like once our beloved family members do get sick, it's often on the family to make a lot of these choices, right? Once the person can't speak or just too either drugged up or just too like tired or maybe they had a stroke or something. It's like on the family to make these choices. And just like birth, you're only given the options that they have. So there's
Mm-hmm.
very little resource of like, this is how you can stay home and like, this is what that would look like. And here's how you can have an in-home funeral. And like, those things aren't really given. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty much just like here's what we have to offer, and this is what death is, and here's how it goes, and like follow in line. And so by that time, because everyone denies death for so long, by the time they get there, which sounds like you worked in that field and would have these conversations with people,
Mm-hmm.
like preparing what you're going to do and how you're going to support their beloved dying person. It's like now grief has come over, shock, and all of these things. So choices, like most people don't want to even think in those options and in those times.
Mm-hmm.
So they just let the system, medical system, like just do what they do. Um, yeah, which is why having conversations about death and options, which I actually don't know too much about, that every state is different as far as like in-home death care and in-home funerals and burial
Mm-hmm.
processes, all those things. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I think to the listeners, like if this is something that's interesting to you or you want to like plan for your, future deaths or your beloved's death, it's like figuring those things out now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it is possible. Like it's very, very possible to die a physiological death in home and stay in home for everyone to come and see you in your home. You don't need to be swept off right away. Um, but they will make it seem that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like with birth, they're going to make it seem like if your baby is breech, you have to have a C-section. That's just,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to think that that is truth unless you are like, hold on, wait, this could be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like there's so much there I want to try and speak to. But yeah, and like when babies die in the hospital, often people don't know that they can keep them for, a few days if they want. I birthed my daughter at home and she was breech and I birthed her at home and I knew she was gonna die.
You had already
And
known.
I knew she was gonna die after she was born. Yeah. Um, but I got to keep her at home with me for a few days and people are like, "You're allowed to do that?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, you can." Um, and you're so right about the importance of having some of these conversations while we're well. Just like in birth, like birth is not the time to be like talking to a woman about her choices in labor. Like same
Right.
at near the end of your life, it's not the time to like have all these big conversations. And I actually just recorded like a solo episode a few days ago that's gonna publish later this month, but where I talk about the importance of having like an advance directive where you have conversations with the people who are possibly going to be making the medical decisions for you if you're in a space that you can't, and just knowing the legality. It's different from state to state, but it's pretty consistent that if you're like say in a car accident and you're intubated on medication, that if you haven't filled out one of these forms, that it would, first go to a spouse if you have one. If you don't have a spouse, then if you have adult children, then they would all jointly be making decisions for you.
Which is wild.
And then if you have parents, then they would be, and then it would go to like cousins, and like it's so
Yeah.
if those aren't people that know what your wishes are, like if you haven't had those conversations, then they will just be making decisions based on mostly like what they want for themselves and not knowing what you would want for yourself in those different scenarios, whether you're comfortable with having a feeding tube, whether you're comfortable living, with needing to be hooked up to an intubator that was
Mhm.
with a breathing tube, a machine breathing for you, or if you
Yeah.
couldn't move your arms or your legs or, all these different things that um, are really hard and important things to talk about with their loved ones.
Right. And I remember in the like workshop I did with Zenith Virago, she has a documentary called, or that they made about her, called Zen and the Art of Dying. She's an Australian woman. Um, and she gave us a form that's like your death plan, kind of like your birth plan.
Mm-hmm.
And it also included like, would you want like music playing? Do you want to die alone? Do you want to die? Do you want people around you? Like, what do you want? You know? Because people will just like assume. And also, like, what do you want your funeral to be like? What songs
Mm-hmm.
do you want played at your funeral? Things like this, because it also, filling out something like that also has us look death in the eye and look our death in the eye, and at least somewhat in the eye. If you're not totally comfortable looking it all the way in the eye, it's like it starts to open up that acceptance of it. Um, and yeah, just the same as a birth plan. Like when I want candles and I want whatever, like those
Give
kinds
me
of
this
things.
music or this food or
Uh-huh. This is
yeah.
what I want there. And
And this type of touch is comforting to me.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so important because some people might truly want to die alone, and we might make up stories that they don't, and that, it's wrong that they died alone, or that we might feel guilty that we weren't there, or whatever it is. My grandma passed away last summer, and I saw her, Koa and I again saw her, I think the day before she died. And
Mm-hmm.
and I just had a feeling that she actually wanted to die alone after we all like came to see her. She was already just kind of that kind of woman. She liked to be alone. She was very like independent and peaceful, just as her personality. But I noticed myself making up stories like, oh, I wish I could have been there. And I was like, wait, no, like this is this is great, this is right for her.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, having those plans, it can also be really comforting for someone who's dying that you love, to ask them those questions and, you know, fill out the paper for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually really common that when I, worked within death and was with a lot of different people and families and end of life, that it was often, yeah, one or the other where, people were like wanting, like not leaving their loved one's side because they really wanted to be present for that last breath. And then they like finally had to go somewhere. And that's when the person, like, I feel like chose to have their last breaths and die because they didn't want to be witnessed, didn't want those people there. And
Yeah.
I've also witnessed like the other side where someone, we think the medical team says they're not going to last another day, and some family members like really wants to come and be, and it's obvious that this person is holding and waiting for that
Yeah.
person, and that person comes, and then later that day or hours later they take their last breath and
Mm-hmm.
die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 It's so
Mhm.
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And that could be an interesting thing to talk about too, because I think often, at least what I've noticed, what I've witnessed when my stepmom was dying in the hospital, she also had cancer. And she was in, an induced pretty much state of sleep. But it's like people like to have that conversation or they ask the question, do you think she can hear us? Right? Do you think that she's like here and can hear us? And they'll kind of like not act as though the person can, which I think is common.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I feel like they often can hear us, and that they can, maybe even if they can't hear us, that they can sense us. And in the little like pamphlet that we gave out to people about end of life, like in there they talk about through, studies, they believe that hearing is one of those last things to go, and that
Mm,
oftentimes they can hear us even if they're not making any sort of like visual
right.
or auditory response to us, that they actually can hear us and what we're saying around them.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, when I worked with people, even strangers that I didn't know and was caring for them, I would say, introduce myself and tell them that I was gonna, get a warm washcloth and, wipe their face or put some, like salve on their lips, or describe what I was going to do as I was preparing to do it so that they wouldn't be surprised, or,
Yeah.
speak to them as though they understood me, not knowing whether or not they did, but I felt better assuming that they did.
Right. Just like a baby, right? It's
Yeah,
like some people don't think babies understand. I think they do, even if they don't like know the words, they
yeah,
know. They know what you're
yeah.
saying. You're like, oh, sweetie, like, oh, that scared you? Like, oh, okay, I got you. You're safe. Like, they know
Hmm.
that.
Yeah,
Um,
the rhythm and the sound of our voice.
mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I always felt that way too. It's just like this environment, someone dying is so sacred. And they may want to just hear chatter. They may want to just hear people in their room talking and, their children bickering and whatever. Um, so there's no like perfect way to be in that space, I don't think either. But I think
No,
definitely be reverent of the person
yeah,
and not speaking about them in a way that they're not listening.
totally. Yeah. Would you like to share more in depth about Kathy's death and your
Sure.
experience with her?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only death I've actually been present for when the person leaves their body. And mm, I took care of her for a couple of weeks while she was still um, alert and present and mobile, not mobile. She was like in a wheelchair, but eating, and alive, very like alive. And the unique thing about Kathy is that she had a brain aneurysm about 10 years prior. So she had short-term memory loss. So she knew me, she knew everyone that she loved. She could remember even new people that she met. She met them enough times, she could remember them. But the day-to-day life stuff, like what are we doing? Where do, where are we? What's next? We're always, kind of she'd always have questions about that. So as she was dying, she would ask, "Am I dying?" Because she couldn't remember, which was just such a unique place to be in. And I didn't, I just trusted my gut in being honest with her every time that she asked. I think a lot of other people weren't honest with her because it was just easier to just say, "Oh no, no, you're not." And, she'd ask again 10 minutes later. And I, yeah, chose to be honest. And she would respond differently almost every time. She was Christian woman, so we would talk about God sometimes, and other times she would cry, and it would be like very hard. That was a very interesting part of the end of life, at least for me. It was like very, yeah, it it can I continuously had to be like confronted with this question and telling
Mhm.
someone that they're going to die,
Mhm.
which was intense. Yeah, I feel like I did
Mhm.
a really good job. I was 20. I feel like I did a really good job. I was just, like I said, I was already in that like in between world space just because of what happened to my consciousness. But um, it was really beautiful. It was really, really beautiful. So yeah, so then I went back home. I was staying in San Diego to take care of her. Yeah, for a while. I went back home and then I got the call from my dad that it was her time. It was coming. So I flew back down to San Diego and pretty much lived in the hospital with her for a few days. And my dad, and was pretty much the support to my dad and kind of this death walker, this like grounding rod in the room for her and him,
So big.
which, yeah, was so big and like so important. Um, yeah, just like it changed me and my dad's relationship forever. Um, yeah, like I mentioned, I'd had kind of a hard childhood. He wasn't a very good dad, in many ways, and also like loved me always so much. And love was never lacking in my childhood. It was more just everything else that was crazy. Um, so this was like a really, really important time for me in my family system as well, because pretty much around like I started living with Gma when I was 14 and working and whatever. I'd kind of separated myself from my family as a teen and just like got really independent. I'll do it on my own. And this was like a time that brought me back to my family, and I felt connected to not only my dad but other family members as well, partially because of them like seeing me in my maturity, I guess, and seeing me in that role. So special time. And her kids came, my four step siblings. She had two sets of twins. So they came, and her ex-husband came, and everyone. I was the most, I was her stepdaughter. I was the most removed from her, like where everyone else had very, very, very deep ties with her. We had actually quite a hot and cold relationship ourselves, her and I. So I got to be like this grounding rod in the room for everyone, and when they would be there, like the one to kind of call everyone into prayer and into holding hands and making kind of guiding these moments, these like pause moments where I think it can be so easy for people when their dearest ones are dying to just be like in a frenzy and kind of like overwhelmed. So I just felt my role very clearly. And everyone seemed to be grateful for that. So after her kids left, they came the final day, just like you talked about. Like she wanted to see her kids. And they left. And I knew it was coming. And my dad knew it was coming. But he is a very, what's the word? Um, fidgety, anxious. Like he's on the phone pacing back and forth and, going out to his car and coming back inside and getting a coffee and all the things, that's just kind of how he is in general. And then so his wife dying on top of it, um, yeah, it was just like, whoa, this is a lot. So he wanted to like keep turning on the TV and watching TV in the hospital room, Um, and I just remember lovingly saying, like, Dad, will you turn that off? Like, I want to sing, and just doing things like that, just inviting him into this space without like guilting him or anything like that. And instead, just like, yeah, inviting in something different. So he was just like, oh, yeah, of course, like, turn it off. And he got in her little hospital bed with her. Um, and I just sang to her with my hands on her.
Mm.
And
Do you remember what you would sing?
I sang the Gayatri mantra mostly,
Mm.
which is Sanskrit. I was like very into yoga at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like can be so beautiful and yeah, can just be such like can like carry the
Mm-hmm.
tones and
Yeah.
the words in different ways. So I just sang that. And I remember lots of people coming in and like like lots of nurses peeping in. I wasn't being like loud by any means, but it was like we were a presence on that floor. And probably for like an hour or so. And I stopped and she was going. She was dying and
Mm.
my dad just like laid there with her. And I think we were looking at each other. It's a little like foggy now, like birth, right? Like it's foggy.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think we were looking at each other, kind of like checking in. Like, is this really happening? Like, is she dying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think my dad looked at me and said, she's gone. Um, and we just, broke into tears and we're just crying. Um, I don't know how long they let us just be like that with her. I think it was 10 minutes. I
Mm.
I think before they came in and like
Not very
closed her
long.
eyes. Not very long, right? Like closed her eyes. Maybe it was longer, but unhook
Time
her.
is kind of elusive sometimes, just like
Right.
birth and death. Yeah.
I know we didn't get home until like 3 or 4 hours after she died. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think they did let us stay with her a bit longer. And then they had us, they usually have you leave the room when they move the body and all that. But they may have just wheeled her actually out. And then, my dad had to do some paperwork. And we left. And we went home. I think I called her daughter and let her daughter know that she had died. And, she then told the rest of their family. And yeah, when she died, it was like I don't even know how to describe it. It was just like her spirit and whatever those like guardianship like filled that room, and she felt so safe, and it felt so human, like it felt so wildly familiar, um but like nothing I'd ever felt before. And it was incredible. And she came to me in my dream that night,
Mm.
and she like I said, we had a pretty hot and cold relationship, her and I, and my sister and her. It was just like, yeah. But there was one road trip that we went on when I don't know how old I was, 14. We went on this road trip with my dad and her and my sister, and we went to New Mexico. But on the way, we stopped in Flagstaff, and it was the summertime, but you can go on their ski lift in the summer and get to the top and like see the view. So we all rode on the ski lift together, and it was like such a fun time. Like we were all being so goofy, and like we had such a fun trip together. So in the dream, she and I were on a ski lift, similar, and she was like showing me where she was going, which was like to wherever you want to call it. In her world, it's heaven. Um, and we were like riding on this like ski lift together, and she like showed me where she was getting off and pretty much being like, I'm good. Like I'm good. I'm like I'm where I need to be. And like thank you for like riding with me. Um, it was so cool. And yeah, yeah. And then we met with her parents the next day, her dad. And again, just like I stayed by my dad's side as all the next
Mhm.
processes went on and
And how
funeral.
many years ago was that now? I'm just thinking about how like vivid you can tell that dream story.
8 years
And
ago.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had weird, strange with every beloved person that has died. I've had some kind of really vivid dream with them.
Hmm.
A past lover of mine passed away a couple years ago from brain cancer, and uh, I had this dream with him where he didn't have a funeral because it was like during COVID, so there
Hmm.
wasn't like a ton of closure for me, and I'm
Hmm.
not like friends with any of his friends or anything like that. But in this dream, he like brought me to his funeral. He like walked with me to the funeral and like sat with me in the front row. And it was just like, yeah, it was so intense and beautiful and sad and all the things.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first dream that I had with Bjorn after he died, it was like there was a bridge and he was like walking onto the bridge. And I remember like running to him, and, like jumping into his arms. And we were like on the bridge and embraced on this
Wow.
bridge. And, in the moment, I didn't really even understand how symbolic the bridge was until later, thinking about
Yeah.
that and how he was then on this other side and I was here.
Mm. Chills. It's so beautiful. It's amazing, like how our psyches understand death,
Hmm.
right? Like that like sure I could have been delivered the dream, but also my psyche could have just like connected those dots, like
Hmm.
put that ski lift together, and for you, like the bridge is just so, amazing. Like when you dive into Carl Jung's work, and there's just like so much of that, right? It's just like
Mm-hmm.
how our psyches really understand death to the best of their
Yes.
ability, because it's very
Yes.
hard to cognitively wrap our heads around, just like it's hard to wrap our heads around being a human being on a planet in the
Mm-hmm. Or like, where does the soul come from and where does it go? And
right. It's
yes, being in this
hard to
meat suit and
right. Is the earth round or is it flat? Or like
yes, and like you spoke to earlier in this life where we're so focused on like tasks and doing certain things and being certain ways in the world rather than just like being present and experiencing the world in our lives.
right. Which you asked about movement earlier, and I didn't really speak to it, but that's for me so much of what a movement practice is. It's just like being a human and like I can
Yes.
move my fingers and I can like move my hand in this way and make my body like do these movements, and then being in my body as that's happening and telling a story through the movements. And to me it's just like the it's just an imagery. It's like the culmination of like what it means to be human and have emotions and a body and stories,
Mm-hmm.
and just what we're capable of as humans. Surfing is the other thing like that. I don't really surf, but
Mm-hmm.
watching surfers, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, they're on a board that like a human made, like shaped, and they're riding the ocean. Like, what? And especially when there's like a sunset in the background, you're just like, oh my gosh, like, wow, being a human is like so cool. This is like a playground down here. It's also, you know, a tragic playground in many ways. But
It's
um,
like bittersweet, you know, life is both and
yeah,
yeah.
it's wild. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I know you spoke of Kimberly Ann Johnson, and I just saw earlier today on her Instagram that her and Stephen Jenkinson, which I got to go to their talk in Asheville. And I've been a fan of Stephen Jenkinson for, since I was introduced into the death world.
Mm-hmm.
Their talk was amazing, their in-person one. And I think the one that they're about to do is virtual, but they're going to do a birth and death three-part conversation. Um,
Yes, I'm registered for it.
oh, you are? Okay, I need
Yes.
to register. I like just saw it today and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me too. I'm so curious because they're both these realms that I, have lived and worked within. And so I'm, yeah, too excited to hear and witness the
right.
conversations that they have around it.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Jenkinson's is just like something else, It's like, what? What?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yes. I actually wrote, I don't have it with me, but he wrote some quote about how, like, something about dying, like, we don't all, now I'm gonna have to pull it up. So Kimberly says, then there's death, also a universal experience. Although Stephen Jenkinson would say, not so. He would say we have to actively die, that it's not just an inevitability.
Mm-hmm.
I I don't know how I feel about that, but I think it's an interesting thing to ponder.
That's like a lot of what he says. It's like, huh, okay. Like it opens up a thought, provoke a pondering to happen. A lot of what he has to say. I
Mhm.
loved listening to them live. It was like so cool.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 In the response that you did to my call out for someone to like have this dialogue with, you spoke about enjoying or honoring death and crafting meaningful and intentional ceremonies for loved ones. Would you
Yeah.
share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I kind of fell into that training with Zenith Virago. I just become like best friends with this woman, Shay, who ended up attending my birth years down the road. But
Mm.
she was like, oh, I'm going to this like death doula thing. So I went with her. And the last day, I just like added on. It was like an add-on. It was celebrancy and like holding funerals. And I learned so much from her in that class where she really talked about a funeral as like crafting, like you are crafting an experience for everyone that the person who died like touched in some way. You are like crafting their grief ritual, and it's, like again, like I said, every like death is different, and therefore the funeral should be different too, in the different like arcs and waves that it takes you on, and the overall feel of the funeral, like, like an abusive, alcoholic, drunk grandpa that nobody liked and was actually, they're actually happy that he's gone. That funeral is going to be like very, very different than, you know, my beloved Jima, and who everyone loved, and she touched everyone's lives and threw everybody's birthday parties. Like those are going to be different, and crafting those in a way and really bringing the community through their grief and creating this space for the collective grief to happen, because we don't have very many opportunities for that in our culture, if any, really, unless you're like in kind of smaller communities that do grief rituals. Most of the time, it's just funerals where
Mhm.
people get to have that. So often they're not only grieving this loved one, but it's like the rest of their grief is there as well.
Mhm.
And there's something so powerful about grieving together that can help others feel theirs, and just like let this, not a, we're not ever complete in grief or ever complete with the passing of our loved ones, but there's a completion that happens, that can happen in a funeral.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, she talked about it in, in some ways, like you lead up, right? Like the beginning, there's like some talk about the person, and towards the middle of the funeral, you put on that song that is just like gonna, everyone is gonna just like bubble up. And we went to my partner's grandmother's funeral 2 years ago, and I didn't know her, but I wish I did.
Mhm.
She loved to sing. She's a single mom, raised 5 kids in the 60s, 70s. And she loved to sing, and she loved Jesus. And she would put on her record player, and she would like somehow record over the record. So it's like, so they found some of them. So they played this beautiful song about like going home to Jesus, but she's singing along with the record.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was like nobody, it was like a surprise. And all of a sudden, all of her siblings were like, heard her voice, all of her children, I mean,
Mhm.
heard her voice, and her grandkids. And I just remember Tyler like looking at me and being like, that's Grandma Margie singing. And oh my God, I was just like, I could not stop crying. I didn't even know the woman, but just the funeral was so beautiful. They really spoke to just who she was and her life, and then had that build up of this like
Mm.
downpour. Um, and then you like come back out, and then usually like the montage at the end, right, where there's like you get to cry more, but it's like sweet memories, and it kind of brings everything back together. So she gave some different examples. When a child dies, it's a very different funeral. When someone commits suicide, it's like a very different thing. And she talked about the importance of saying how someone died. She talked about the importance of that, because sometimes people don't like to
Mhm.
do that when it
Mhm.
is suicide, um, that it's not spoken about. And she talked about the importance of that. And she talked about the importance for peer young for kids when a peer dies,
Mhm.
and how for the kids, for their peers, like it's a rite of passage for them. And like that they should be very, very kept in mind as the funeral is crafted. Um, and yeah, creating opportunities for them to grieve and be held, which often, you know, uh, which often requires like the whole community. Um, and especially with teens, like teens don't often want the comfort of their parents. They're actually better held by their aunties and uncles.
Mm.
And just like, yeah, creating those spaces for teens and kids to, yeah, to grieve. So those were some of the things. And then I think in our own lives, in our own small rituals, like the grief isn't done at the funeral.
Mm-mm.
So it's finding ways to continue to have those like little funerals, those little celebrations of their life. Like you said, pizza. Like I like to eat a little bowl of vanilla ice cream, like Thrifty's vanilla ice cream for my grandma, you know.
Yes.
And Gma, I haven't done this yet, but when I lived with her, we'd make strawberry shortcake, but she would like to pick up biscuits from Kentucky Fried Chicken, and that would be the base of the strawberry shortcake. So I'm like, oh, you know what I actually did? I did make biscuits and like made strawberry shortcake like that. So things like that can be such beautiful rituals. Um,
Do you have
and yeah,
photos of her in your home or do
I
you?
don't have a photo of Jima. I have her. So she has this. I still need to get her entire necklace collection, but she loved gem and mineral shows and just like crystal lady, like all over her house.
Uh-huh.
She has this like necklace rack with probably like 100 necklaces and they're color coordinated, like rainbow.
Wow.
So I have a couple of them that I got when I was there, but my her daughter did say that I could have the whole collection, and I plan to put it up on my wall the same way that she had it displayed.
Wow.
And she'd always color coordinate it to her outfits, her
Mm-hmm.
necklaces, and she had long gray hair. She'd wear pigtail braids, and the hairbands would match too.
So cute.
I know, so cute. Um, yeah, I actually don't have I still haven't unpacked the photos that I have of
Yeah.
other loved ones. I need a photo of Gma, but mostly little things. I have like little things from them, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
so grateful to have. And
Mm-hmm.
I have a sweater of Kathy's that I'll wear sometimes. It's very like tatted and ratty now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's like
Yeah.
doesn't need to be anything extravagant, right?
No, I mean, and like, well, I have like these bracelets I'm wearing that were my grandma Elsie's, and
Mm.
I just keep them on all the time, and a ring from her. But sometimes it's as simple as like when something's missing, like she would say, well, it's always exactly where you left it, and
That's
so I'll
amazing.
like say that to my kids or, use that on myself. Like,
That's amazing. I
well, I
need
know,
that.
well, I know it's exactly where I left it. I just don't know where that is,
Oh my God.
Think of her.
I love that. My grandma would like kick us under the table when she like either we said something funny or someone like funny was walking by. She'd love to like people watch. So me and my
Uh-huh.
sister will like do that now when we're together, like kick each other under the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she would like grab like your wrist, like squeeze it of
Uh-huh.
like out of love, things
Mm-hmm.
like things like that. Yeah, like remembering their mannerisms and like inviting those little sayings and little things in is like such a beautiful way to keep their essence close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, remember them and honor them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes when I do like oracle card pulls or something, I'll like ask her to, help me choose the next card and feel like it's a message from her or from Bjorn or from my daughter Hartley. So that's another way that I like to bring them into my life.
And saying their names, that was something um, Zenith talked about. People often, after someone dies, they're so awkward and they don't know
Mm-hmm.
what to say, what not to say,
Mm-hmm.
what to do, like all the things.
Yeah.
And I always love that kind of go-to of like, what was their name? What is
Mm-hmm.
their name? And that moment of reverence is like so powerful. Um,
Absolutely.
I think yeah, it's important to like speak those names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that especially, I mean, maybe not especially, I mean, it's so everywhere, but like in the realm of, because I had my own like infant loss experience, I work with a lot of moms who have also, had babies that have died, and always asking them their baby's name. And even if it's an early loss, like have they named that baby? Or maybe they don't give that baby a formal name, but they have some sort of like a nickname or some way that they refer to that baby, and using that name and writing it on a card, or even like writing it somewhere and showing them that I wrote that name, or
Right.
have some reference to it throughout my day and say, oh, I was thinking of your daughter Violet when I saw this, purple color, or
I think it's extra important with babies, right? Because if it
mm-hmm,
was a stillbirth or an early birth, you know, then you like I think in our culture, because we didn't know them,
mm-hmm,
like they don't have a name, or because they didn't like live a breathing life for at all, or only for a couple of days.
mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah. And I think there's often also just so much sensitivity, of course, when babies die
Mm-hmm.
that they don't want to bring anything up, but it's already up.
I
Like,
know, but as the mother, like we can feel like we're the only one remembering them, or the only
right,
one that like knew they existed, or
right. It's always up. Like it's always there.
yeah,
So to be like, oh,
yes.
I didn't want to, I just know, I know that feeling and I see it in people like, oh, I didn't want to
Mm-hmm,
bring it up.
mm-hmm,
When you see someone a couple months after their father died or whatever, and you're like, oh, I didn't want to bring it up at dinner. It's like,
mm-hmm.
but you should.
Yeah, yeah, and of course in a respectful way, and they can decline to talk about it if they don't want to, but they're thinking about it, and having that
Yeah,
name spoken, even if it brings tears, is almost always like welcomed at the same time.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially moms with early births or even like later term early
Mm-hmm.
births, like,
Yeah. Yes.
can feel so alone in it.
Yeah, like
Um, yeah,
invisible to a lot of people.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Because people don't like see it as a big deal or, as a very big deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not true and very
Yeah.
isolating. And I
Mm-hmm.
imagine very like rage invoking for those women.
Mm-hmm. I remember even like it's so interesting how different like cultures revere things or not. And like in the Jewish culture, like I have a dear friend who's Jewish, and so when I had an early birth loss, and she was like, well, in my culture, they're not like real yet, or whatever, something like that. And she
Mm,
wasn't meaning to be hurtful, but like to me, I
right.
was
Like
like,
their
oh,
spirit isn't there yet or something.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. You're like, okay, but I had a child growing in my body and now I don't.
Hmm. And that might be true for her and her experience in an early birth, but it doesn't mean that was my own experience.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
physiologically, I think the body does recognize it as, you know,
Hmm.
a
Well,
live,
we change, our DNA changes with
right,
each pregnancy that we hold, whether long or short.
right. So like physiologically, our body recognizes a life. within us and then recognizes when it's no longer. And there is grief.
Yes. Yes.
Even with, even with a chosen like ending of a pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's often not spoken about either.
Yeah.
Just, oh, but you chose it. Okay. But it's awful. Like,
Yeah, there's still grief and loss there.
mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling like maybe we're coming to a close. I want to be respectful of your time. But is there anything else you like feel like you came that you wanted to share or anything that's coming up now that you'd like to share?
I don't think so. We covered so much.
Yeah.
We covered so much.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for being willing
Really.
to walk this path with me today.
Yeah.
And I love your website name, Web of Grace. Like, I love web and like thinking about how as women like we connect through the web throughout the whole world. And I love that your website ends in like a dot love because mine does as well. I would love for you to share a little bit more about the work that you do and where women can find you for people who might not. I know we've used somatic experiencing a few times in this conversation, but maybe you can share what it means for those that might not know or understand about it too.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So what I mostly do is I work with women one-on-one, and I am studying somatic experiencing, which is Dr. Peter Levine's lineage of work that is essentially trauma healing through the nervous system. So it's looking at our bodies from this like very physiological, very like animal perspective. I like to say that like our body has like a much simpler story than our minds do. So often when we have things bogging us down or weighing us down or we're struggling in life, we like enter talk therapy, and then eventually people find themselves in some sort of somatic work. And it's often, at least for me, ended up being somatic experiencing and for many people as well. But it's working with the body in real time and letting things complete that didn't get to in the past. And it's a growing of the capacity, like you talked about, like when we let ourselves go into the grief, we actually have more access to joy. So we kind of work between these two worlds of expanding our resources, our capacity for like connection, love, and joy. And simultaneously, we're then able to go into these more unpleasant places and sustain them and be hold ourselves through them, right? So it's really the lens of like the client and their nervous system like guides the session. Like they are their own healer, and SE practitioners just like support the process and observe the nervous system and invite the client into different places to. I offer somatic dance, which is like my nearest and dearest offering to my heart. I've kind of married everything that I've ever learned in this life. I grew up as a classically trained dancer, and went on to study many different things and have combined them all to create a journey through movement. So I offer these quarterly, and they're 3-week series, and we always are exploring different topics. The one I'm enrolling right now, when is this going to release, this podcast?
I was thinking I could next week or the week after, but if you have something, I saw you had a January movement.
Yeah,
Is that
that would
a
work.
dance?
Yeah, it starts January 21st, I think. It's Sunday
Yeah,
evenings.
I would love to release it before that.
Okay. So yeah, this upcoming series is kind of in inspiration of the new year, which I don't resonate with that much, but there is still it's still a cultural threshold. Like it's still a movement from one year to the next. It's still how we remember certain things. So the focus is on letting go of what's ready to be let go of to create space and build capacity to draw in and, call in and hold the things that we're wanting. So there are these 3-week journeys that are just amazing. The first time I offered it, I had no idea how it would be received. And I was almost expecting crickets at the end of the call when I'm like, how'd it go? And I was blown away by everything that was shared, and I continue to be each class. So yeah,
Are they like weekly live calls, or how is the course?
yeah. So they're 3-week series and they're weekly live calls. This round will be Sunday evenings. Um, and the recordings are available for life. And so yeah, you can revisit it anytime. And I also have all the I have all the previous ones available for purchase on my website. And yeah.
Will you name
Yeah.
your website and whatever other social medias where people might be able to follow you?
Yeah, you can find me at Web of Grace on Instagram. And I don't do any of the other social platforms. And my website is www.webofgrace.love.
Beautiful.
Yeah, you can always email me or DM me. I answer my DMs. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for going on this journey with me today and sharing your stories and wondering and pondering these big topics with me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
As I begin the closing of this episode, I am delighted to tell you about this limited time offer, the gift of a short psychic reading for you in exchange for a review of The Heart of the Soul on Apple Podcasts. As each of you are unique, the reading will be as well. I can share that many women express their experience with words like held, witnessed, loved, connected, aligned. They feel increased trust in themselves. They feel seen and often feel more centered with clarity about their purpose and path in this life. You can check out full reviews written about my readings on my mediumship offerings page. Your reading will be given through a voice message on email. What I need from you is a screenshot of the review you have written and a short voice or video message of yourself, introducing yourself to me, first stating and then spelling out your name. Send it to me via email at amana@birthingnova.love. I will use this information from you to record a voice message reading for you that will be about 10 to 15 minutes in length, a nearly $40 to $50 value, as my 30-minute readings are $111 US dollars. I will send your reading back to you as soon as I possibly can. And thank you for tuning in today. If you love the podcast, I'd be so grateful if you choose to subscribe, rate, review, or share the show. If you feel aligned with my energy and are wanting to tap into your wild side, birth your baby wild and free, I support women just like yourself all over the world. To learn more or book your free clarity call with me, go to my website, www.birthingnova.love. Also, if you would like a full mediumship reading, you can book one through my website as well. I would love to connect with you. Until next time, remember to be brave, be bold, be love, be you, and be the change that you seek for yourself and for the generations to come. Love, 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 everyone.